Between the time when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of R.E.H, there was an age undreamed of. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure. Hi, this is my review of Robert E. Howard's Conan, Adventures in an Age Undreamed of. This is the most recent Conan role-playing game. It's published by Modiphius, and it's powered by the 2D20 system. Some of my viewers know that I'm a huge fan of Conan and of Robert E. Howard's works. I'm going to put a link in the description below in case you are not familiar with the stories of Conan as presented in the literary works of Robert E. Howard. In that video, I also talk about Solomon Kane and about Robert E. Howard and about how he has inspired me. So those of you that don't know much about Conan or that have some misconceptions about the character and the author, I recommend that you watch that video. So it is truly a pleasure and an honor for me to review this Conan role-playing game. Let's talk about the quality of the PDF first. Well, when you purchase Conan, you get the normal PDF and a printer-friendly PDF, which is quite useful if you want to save some money on ink. And if you want to load it on your tablet or other portable device, the printer-friendly version loads faster. And you also get a separate file with the entire map of Conan's world, that is the map as presented in the Age of Hyboria. Now let's talk about the quality of the PDF. Well, the quality overall is great. It's top-notch. You have great organization, everything is well explained and written. You have awesome illustrations. I also like the overall graphic layout. It has these sort of like Celtic knots. They look really nice. They're very much in tune with Conan's Celtic cultural background. I am a bit critical of the cover. Even though it's technically perfect, I think it fails a bit in capturing the essence of Conan. As you can see, Conan is struggling with this tentacle horror sort of thing, and Conan is no stranger of being entangled with all sorts of tentacles and giant snakes and such, but he seems a bit out of balance in my opinion. In many of the other Conan illustrations, even though Conan apparently isn't at a disadvantage, he always feels like he has this position of solidity, of balance, of holding his ground, and here he seems a bit like he's being flung around, and this heroine is trying to help him free himself from those tentacles. Although I do like his face, like he's kind of like, I don't need your help, woman, kind of like that. But as I was telling you, to me it feels like it takes a bit of the essence of Conan's character. Now let's talk about the content. First, you get a couple of nice forewords by the people involved in the project. So it's really nice to see that they appreciate the style of Robert E. Howard and the source material. Overall, you get a really nice introduction to this version of the role-playing game of Conan, Adventures in an Age Undreamed of. Then, in the first chapter, you have a lot of tips that are quite basic. They're basically there for someone who has never played role-playing games before. So they serve as an excellent introduction to role-playing games. If you are watching this and you're watching it because you are a fan of Conan but you have never played RPGs before, this game is perfect as an introduction to role-playing games. And then you have chapter 2, which is about character creation. I really like how they managed to integrate all the steps of character creation into the world of Conan. You really feel like you are fleshing out a character of these stories. You could create a barbarian type of character following in Conan's footsteps, but you could create any character that you like, perhaps modeled after some character in Conan's stories. Perhaps you want to create a sexy and indomitable character such as Red Sonja, or maybe you want to create um, an opportunistic thief like Taurus. Or maybe you want to create a loyal general like Palantides, or a sorcerer like Pelias, or an intrepid and attractive fighter such as Valeria. So you have all the information to create any sort of character that fits into the stories, into the land of Conan. That is the R.E.H as presented in Robert E. Howard's works. The first step, Homeland, it basically gives you a way to generate the place of birth of the character, but you can play around with this table of random homelands and talents and languages. Maybe your character was born at a certain place but had to go to some other area because maybe he was taken as a slave, or you had to escape for some reason. So here you can get the homeland associated with a talent and a language. So for example, maybe you come from Cimmeria, so you have the talent of hunter and the language being Cimmerian. Or maybe you come from Argos, so your talent is Sea Raider and your language is Argosian. So you have different ways, and all of these talents will give you obviously an advantage during different situations. So for example, when it comes to the Sea Raider talent, it says, the difficulty of all sailing tests made in your homeland's waters are reduced by 1. This can reduce tests to a difficulty of simple. Additionally, the difficulties of any athletics tests relating to swimming are similarly reduced. Or maybe you come from a savage court. With civility being a new addition to your homeland, it is difficult to know when the old ways will rise to the surface. In any scene within your homeland, you can take a free challenging lore test. Each point of momentum gives you a general idea as to how easily it will be to overturn the civility of the moment and cause savage old emotions to rule the day. I will talk a bit more about these mechanics later on. Then you have step 2, attributes. The attributes are pretty self-explanatory. You have agility, awareness, brawn, coordination, intelligence, personality, willpower. So you can play around with these starting attributes. Many of the steps in character creation can be generated randomly, or you can pick and choose whatever you like. It's up to you and the game master, or you can combine both things. You can have some random elements and some things that you decide to choose to fit into a general character concept. With these attributes, you could even belong to an ancient bloodline. So you could get some advantages during certain social situations, but you could also be hated by those that hate your blood or fear it. And then step 3, caste. Depending on your caste, you're going to get different caste talents, skills, and stories related to that caste. And I will cover stories in a bit. And you also get a social standing rating that could give you an advantage. You could be more famous or perhaps even infamous in certain situations. So perhaps you are a crafter and you have the talents of subject and tradesman and the skill of craft. Or maybe you are a warrior, so you could have case talents of being a sentry, or you're a subject as well, and your skill could be parry. And social standings vary, of course. An escaped serf or slave could have a social standing of 0, but if you belong to nobility or to the priesthood, you could have a social standing of 2. Let's talk a bit about the caste talent. So for example, maybe you are embittered. You have long since given up fealty to your lord. You avoid taxes and play fast and loose with the law. Within the borders of your homeland, embittered reduces your social standing by 2, and as a result reduces the cost of your upkeep. Outcasts are at -2 social standing, and escaped slaves are at -1. Hence, upkeep is reduced by -2 and -1 respectively. So you have many things, as I was telling you. Maybe you were sheltered, or maybe you are a tradesman, a vagabond, etc. Step 4 is story. There are different stories related to the different castes. So some crafter stories could be exalted mark, gifted mark, and they are usually related to traits. So for example, the pressed for war has the envious peers traits, or the sundered mark has the cast aside trait. Traits can be used to obtain fortune points as you play the game. Traits are basically a way for you to play the role of your character in a way that feels or effectively works this as a disadvantage for your character. So you will get rewarded with fortune points that you can use to have success in different tests, but you will get in a complicated situation. So for example, maybe your character is a herder with the event of raiders, and therefore you have a vengeful trait. Maybe you have a grudge against a certain group of raiders, and when you find out that they are staying at a particular tavern or inn or whatever, you could feel hungry for revenge, and you would be a bit sidetracked. You would tell your other party members, "Oh, let's go because I need to get revenge on these raiders." So that could create a bit of a conflict or a complication, but you would be rewarded with a point of fortune. So there are many different stories, outcast stories related to one of the rabble with the betrayed trait, or maybe you are hunted by the law with the hunted trait. Next, it's step 5, archetype. There are different archetypes to represent all sorts of people, of fighters, travelers, any sort of profession that you can think of, and it's basically something to represent different abilities, objects that you take with you, skills and such. So the archetypes are archer, barbarian, mercenary, noble warrior, nomad, priest, pirate, scholar, scoundrel, and witch. And just to give you an example of what an archetype is all about, let's talk about the witch. You have made pacts with powers that are not of this world, sought knowledge forbidden to and feared by most. And for this daring you have been granted power and insights beyond those of mortal men and women. And you get a bonus to your career skills. You have a bonus related to skill expertise and skill focus. Related to persuasion, you have career talents such as force of presence. You have a bonus to alchemy, counseling, healing. You have other elective skills related to animal handling, sorcery, thievery. You begin with a sharp knife, a toughened leather jacket, healer's kit, alchemist's kit, etc. And then you have step 6, nature. This has to do with the psychology of your character. Maybe you are cautious, or maybe you are learned or practical. Maybe you are sneaky, or maybe you are wrathful. And again, all of this has a really nice way of bridging the story and the theme with the mechanics of the game. Then we have step 7, education. Maybe your education was against your parents' will, or maybe you had an elder mentor. Maybe you had a traditional education or it was under duress. All of that will have its own bonuses and talents and things related to your skills. Then we have step 8, war story. And I really like this one. You have different war stories. They basically represent how your character was shaped into an adventurer or a fighter of sorts. Because in the world of Conan, in the Hyborian Age, everybody experiences savagery and violence and death in one way or another. And those that do not are usually victims or become damsels. So maybe you defeated a savage beast when you were very young, like Conan, who killed wolves, and I think it was also an aurochs or an ox, I'm not sure. Or maybe you were dispossessed, or maybe you prevented a disaster. Maybe you survived the duel. And all of these war stories will give you a bonus to expertise and focus related to different skills. Then you have step 9, finishing touches. This is all about further polishing attributes, skills, stories, talents. It has to do again with as well with language and fortune points that I was telling you that will help you succeed when things seem quite impossible. And then you have step 10, final calculations. Just calculating resolve, vigor and gold, damage bonuses, personality, appearance, age, name. By the end of this chapter, you have many different ways in which you can tweak the character creation process so that you can create characters that are more tied up together. That is, maybe you have a group of dog brothers and sword sisters so that they all speak the same language, and they perhaps they are all pirates or mercenaries. You have many options to make characters perhaps a bit weaker, because this character creation process is for characters that feel larger than life, just like Conan. But there are ways to tweak this creation process for particular campaigns. Now let's talk about chapter 3, skills and talents. I really like how they handle skills here. As expected of the 2d20 system, this is handled similarly to Mutant Chronicles. So you have different skills, but they have different talents. That is, you have a talent tree for each skill. So for example, maybe your character is into acrobatics. You could have two characters that are quite agile, but one of them would focus more on the savage instincts or lightning reflexes side of the tree. Another character could be nimble as a cat, or could have a pantherish twist to him. So for example, someone who has lightning reflexes could be, it says, your quick reactions mean you are rarely caught unawares. When involved in a struggle to resist being surprised, you gain 2 bonus on momentum. So this character is more focused on getting the jump on others and not being surprised. But someone in the acrobatics talent tree could go on the side of the pantherish twist. And here it says, you may use your acrobatics skill in place of parry when attempting a defend reaction, reducing the amount of doom generated by 1 to a minimum of 0. And that's actually really useful. So as you can see, even though these two characters have focused on the acrobatics talent tree, one of them is focused more on surprising others, and the other is more on reacting. So that's really nice. And the skills are quite varied. You have alchemy, animal handling, craft, discipline, melee, resistance. And many of these skills will allow you to build characters more suited for different weapons and armor. Because, for example, maybe you want to create a character scantily clad, perhaps just in loincloth, and that could not be so workable or feasible in other role-playing games. But here, with talents that focus more on the side of parrying and dodging, or perhaps the resistance talent, which gives you the iron skin resistance talent, it could be a bit easier to be a frontliner wearing little to no armor. I actually met a policeman once that had this huge scar from his side to the jaw, and a criminal actually tried to stab him in the face, so he always joked that he had a really tough skin, so maybe he took the iron skin talent. So as I was telling you, really like the way they handle skills and those talent trees. There is something just so addictive about talent trees in role-playing games. You're always thinking on what to choose next. Now let's talk about the rules. As I was saying, this system is the 2d20 system. It focuses on rolling a pair of 20-sided dice and achieving success by rolling as low as possible. You usually have an attribute related to a test, and then you have expertise for that particular task. So maybe you have an attribute of 8 and you have an expertise of 2, then you would add 8 plus 2, 10. So you need to roll 10 or below that to generate a success. But you also have focus. And focus gives you like a bit more leeway or range to strike what I would call like a critical success. So for example, maybe you have a focus of 2. That means that if you roll 2 or below that, that is 1. You would generate additional successes. So it's a really cool way to generate successes beyond what is needed. And if you generate more successes than needed, that will become momentum. And momentum can be used in many different ways, perhaps for special attacks or to generate greater quality of success. And when doing different tests, maybe it takes a bit less time, maybe your performance is quite masterful, but there is also the risk of complications. let's say that you roll a 20, that will give the game master an excuse to complicate matters. However, it's complicated in the sense of failing forward. That is, maybe you wanted to walk across this very narrow pathway, and the game master creates a complication where you slip and fall from that pathway, but you discover a cave down there. So that separates you from the rest of the party, but it gives you like another path to take. But maybe there's a horrible monster inside that cave, and maybe you scraped yourself a bit, generated some stress when you fell down. So this system of failing not only focuses on penalizing player characters, but it also gives something more interesting to the story. And if the game master doesn't wish to complicate things, he could take Doom points instead. Now, Doom points, when I first heard about the Conan role-playing game using the 2d20 system, I was quite curious as to how they would represent this, because the 2d20 system felt at times too tailored towards the Mutant Chronicles game, and there you have the dark symmetry pool that represents the influence of the dark soul, a very evil and nasty intelligence affecting all things, especially those things that are high-tech. But here I think the Doom mechanic, that is a system of points used to make the characters' lives a bit more difficult, makes sense, because in the Conan stories there is always this evil sorcerer or some kind of nefarious deity or eldritch devil pulling the strings or moving behind the curtains and trying to get the characters into trouble. So that this Doom pool could represent that way in which some higher evil intelligence is trying to get the characters into danger and all sorts of chaotic situations. So it also feels a bit like juggling with your game master. It feels like the game is constantly moving forward, like there's always action, because it is possible to allow the game master to take more Doom points into his Doom pool for you to roll additional 20-sided dice during tests. But of course the game master will be able to use these Doom points to activate effects that are to the character's disadvantage, or perhaps when fighting enemies, the game master can use Doom points to activate different powers and abilities to hurt the player characters. So you have different ways in which you can measure difficulties. Sometimes you just need one success, sometimes you need more. You also have information how to carry out struggles and oppose tests. You can even take voluntary failures, that is, maybe you are being chased around by some enemies, perhaps in a very dangerous jungle where there are many chasms or maybe wild animals, and you don't want to take that chance of perhaps falling down some pit or something, and you decide to fail the chase test, and you decide it's better to take your chance to fight against your enemies, and that will give you actually give the game master a Doom point for his pool, but you could get a fortune point as well. So sometimes it's better to take that failure. You have more information on success and improving the odds, and momentum, as I was telling you, a way to get additional successes, and some common uses for momentum, because maybe you want to create some sort of opportunity or create an obstacle for your enemies. Maybe you want to like drop a barrel or push some crates over an enemy when fighting in a marketplace, so that could give you an advantage during combat. You could also use momentum to obtain information, improve quality of success, reduce time, etc. Something that I also like of the structure of this rulebook is that you have many tips and examples on how to handle things. Especially they give you hints on how to handle things the Robert E. Howard way, that is according to the original Conan literature. When it comes to action scenes, which usually have to do with combat, each turn a character can carry out a standard action, a minor action, and any number of free actions within reason. So once you determine the turn order, or if somebody was surprised, you start carrying out these actions and you move across zones on the battlefield. This is a very abstract way to handle combat. Miniatures are not necessary, but if you like using miniatures, it could be a useful tool because it's also recommended that players and the game master keep like a sketch of the battlefield divided by zones, so that you can have an easier way of handling that abstraction in combat. So you have to take into consideration obstacles in terrain, hazards, and hindrances. Maybe you will have to climb and jump around. Maybe you will have to swim, and some monsters can actually fly, so you have to take that into consideration. You have details on cover and morale as well. When it comes to actions, well, basically everything is a skill test, but there are ways to react to different attacks. So if you get attacked, you could decide to defend or protect yourself in different ways, but this adds doom points to the game master's doom pool. But thanks to the talents in the skills section, there are some talents that allow you to defend yourself without adding points. So when you create your character, you have to keep this in mind: what types of actions you are going to carry out during combat, and the ways in which you can build your characters so that you don't keep adding doom points to the doom pool. And the game master can actually use the doom pool points to react. That is, the non-player characters, the enemies and such, can react to the player's character's attacks, and could also defend, parry, and such. When it comes to damage, I really like it. I also expected this because of the Mutant Chronicles role-playing game, but you have quite a bit of leeway or some way to mitigate the damage that you take suffered through stress. That is, many of the bumps, bruises, and minor cuts that you suffer will be recorded as stress. So they are not that dangerous. In fact, if you, by using momentum and other things, you can actually heal some of the stress suffered. But if you suffered too much stress or beyond what you can tolerate of stress, then you will suffer harm. And harm is quite difficult to heal when compared to other more, let's say, easier games. So here, if you start taking a lot of wounds, you will have to find a way to rest and recover, unless you use some type of magical or healing skill. But even so, this game feels quite gritty if you are not careful and managing the stress that you suffer. When you take damage, it is randomly determined that is where that damage falls on. Maybe you get hit on the head, maybe you get cut on your right arm, maybe you get stabbed in your right leg or torso. So it also depends on the armor that you are wearing in that specific area. So for example, if you are wearing a shoulder pad, then cuts to your arm are going to be somewhat mitigated. But if you take too much damage, you could also decide to sacrifice that armor so that you do not get hurt too badly, but you will lose that armor. So goodbye shoulder pad. And there are also ways to handle this differently. Maybe some players don't like the random hit location, so they could eliminate hit location altogether, or they could determine hit location not randomly, but based on the defender's choice. You can also take mental damage, because even though this is Robert E. Howard, not H.P. Lovecraft, there will be times where you see these nefarious sacrificial rituals and vile ceremonies and horrors and mental attacks. So you could also take mental damage. And in fact, in the Conan stories, there are many times where Conan is quite afraid of many things. Sometimes he actually decides to run away. So you also have to keep in mind as to how much horror your character can tolerate. Now, you also have many details on ranged attacks and unarmed attacks as well. And something that I really like are displays of might and power. This is very much in theme with the original Robert E. Howard stories. So if you want to cut the head of your enemy in true Celtic warrior fashion and show it at your enemies or throw it at them like some sort of missile, you will intimidate them quite a bit. Or maybe you are quite famous and your name strikes fear in the hearts of your opponents, and you could say, I am Conan, and they're going to be terrified. So you have all the details on the skill that you need to use to intimidate your opponents, the range at which you can use it, the mental damage it deals, qualities. Maybe something is like an area mental attack of sorts. Something could stun your opponents. And you have different things such as a mighty name, dead man's stare, flaming brand, steely glare, sorcerer's might. So if you want to play like a wizard type of character, you can also intimidate them through the use of sorcery. And all of these displays have requirements. Of course, you cannot use the intimidate someone with a decapitated head if you don't cut the head of your enemy first, obviously. And if you want to paint the entire battlefield red, well, you need to kill quite a few enemies for that. So you have to keep that in mind. And then you have conditions that could arise from different attacks. Maybe you blinded your opponent, or maybe you are being burned by some spell or something, or maybe you are hindered or poisoned. You also have details on drowning, suffocation, diseases, movement, fighting on top of some sort of mount that you could charge at top of your while galloping. And you also have details on beasts of burden, how to attack vehicles, especially useful if you are playing as raiders or bandits. And then you have chapter 6, all about equipment. Now, purchasing and selling equipment in this game is handled somewhat abstractedly. So for example, there is abstraction when it comes to common items. They are replenished as part of your character's upkeep between different adventures, but obtaining a specific sword or axe, it's not always easy. Remember, this is the Hyborian age, so sometimes getting the right tool or right weapon for the job could take some days. So it all depends on tests and on your location. So you have details on different animals, horses, donkeys. You have details on carts, carriages, boats, ships, watercraft. You have details on different kits, alchemy kits, healing kits, sorcery kits, camouflage gear. You have details on libraries, weapons such as broadswords, scimitars, two-handed swords, of course, an old favorite, different types of daggers and knives, clubs, warhammers, axes, crossbows, bows, shields. And you also have details on armor. And even though armor will give you the protection that you need to keep in mind that some of it is quite cumbersome, noisy, and not the best when it comes to adventuring and moving around and spelunking across different forgotten temples and dangerous caves. Perhaps the game master will use your armor as an excuse to create complications, so keep that in mind. You also have details on using improvised weapons as well. Now, chapter 7 is all about sorcery. As many of you know, in the world of Conan, sorcery is something to be mistrusted, something to be feared. Sometimes it's quite subtle, but other times it's quite explosive and destructive. So here you have all the different traditions of sorcery as seen in the Conan stories: Western sorcery, Eastern sorcery, theurgy, shamanism, witchcraft, Acheronian magic, of course. And you have the sorcerer's repertoire, different details on alchemy, animal handling and survival, on the way the sorcerers sometimes manipulate or persuade the different leaders of different regions, different details on petty enchantments, which are basically substances produced by alchemy, details on how to make them. Perhaps you want to make exploding powder or talismans, or lotus pollen. The lotus flower is a staple of Conan's stories as well. So you have details on damage and the type of hindrances that they cause, descriptions and effects. You have the different talent trees for sorcery. Maybe your sorcery is more on the side of having pacts and bartering souls and such, but maybe you are more on the enchanter side of things. So you have all the details to carry out all sorts of pacts, of getting patrons and performing curses. You even have, of course, details on human sacrifice, something that is seen in many of the more terrifying Conan stories. Details on casting spells and the consequences on failing those spells. You have a list of spells such as Commune with the Wild, Dismember, Favor of the Gods, Form of a Beast, Raise Up the Dead, Summon Horror, Venom on the Wind. I really like it that they focus on the terrifying aspects of sorcery, because in Conan's world, sorcery is always something creepy, forbidden, dangerous. Even the most heroic spellcasters in Conan's tales and adventures have that sense of that you cannot fully trust them, or that you do not all of their intentions. And then we have another chapter that gives great detail on the world of Conan, of the R.E.H. And you're going to love this chapter. Conan's world reminds me a bit of what H.P. Lovecraft tries to communicate. I mentioned it in one of my videos about H.P. Lovecraft. I'm going to put a link in the description below to that video. That something that I really liked of H.P. Lovecraft's stories was that he always showed you a small glimpse of a particular temple, of a particular island, or some sort of jungle, but he never really truly presented everything about that area or that location, and you always wanted to know more, to interact with those strange creatures, to go into those places dark and forgotten. But in Conan, Conan being the tough, brave adventurer that he is, he always delves a bit deeper into these places. So here in this chapter, you're going to get a lot of details of the Hyborian world. You even get some words from famous characters from the Conan stories, giving you details from different regions and places. So you're going to get all the information of the Black Kingdoms, of the lands of the North, different lands of the East, Zamora the Accursed. You're going to get details on the Way of the Thief, everything about rogues and the Kingdom of Zamora. You're going to get information of the Desert Kingdoms, of Gauran, of Shem, of Stygia, of course. You're going to get information of the Western Ocean, of Argos, the Varakan Isles, of Singara. You're going to get information of Sambola and the lands of the Southeast, Iranistan, Gulistan. You're going to get all the details of the lands of the mysterious East, Vendia and Hittite, the Southern Kingdoms, Shumbala's outer city. You're going to get details of Kush, Kashan, Darfar, and Punt, different cults. You're going to get information of the Dreaming West, the voices of the R.E.H. You're going to get a lot of information of Aquilonia as well, of course. So there's just a ton of information. I know that this information is going to be further expanded or elaborated upon in future source books, but they really give you a lot with this core rulebook. I'm somewhat excited and terrified of seeing how much they elaborate on the different kingdoms and places of the R.E.H. Chapter 9 is all about game mastering the game. That is, it talks about assumptions of the game, responsibilities related to the game master, many tips on how Robert E. Howard would handle things, perhaps if he were to run a Conan game. You have information on skill tests, on further ways on how to use doom points, on failing forward mechanic that I was telling you, how to use momentum, how to reward player characters, how to present dangerous situations, everything that you want to know. Something that I also really like is that you get events between adventures, because Conan is quite famous of having adventures between adventures, before adventures, and after adventures. So if you like that idea of spending all your hard-earned money or gold in taverns and getting into all sorts of trouble, you're going to have the different tables to generate those events, and you're going to have information how to handle horror and ancient sorcery, all sorts of strange details, how to keep that flavor of wandering adventurers, delving into different places forbidden and unknown. So that's also a very strong point of this game. You do not have to play as a very generalized game experience. If you want to focus your campaign to be more on the pirate side of things, like Strombani or the Black Sarono, you can have those types of adventures. Or you want adventures more focused on the city, like perhaps like the Palantidis, a sort of adventure with a loyal general trying to protect his king. You can have those adventures as well, and you can work those adventures into this table of carousing events that I was telling you. And then you have encounters. Now, encounters is the chapter that deals with all sorts of killer apes, undead horrors, vile sorcerers, corrupt generals, and thugs. This is all about presenting enemies adequate for the adventure and the campaign overall. Enemies are divided by levels of power. You have minions, which are the weaker ones, and these serve as the cannon fodder so that the player characters show how awesome they are at fighting. In many of Conan's stories, Conan is hacking and slashing and cutting away at dozens of enemies, so minions are there for that. Because they work in groups, and when you deal enough damage to kill an enemy, but there is extra damage that could serve to further hurt another enemy or kill it, the damage is transferred to that enemy. So if you perform some devastating and brutal attacks, maybe you will be able to kill 2 or 3 enemies with a single move of your sword when you're a brutal swordplay or axe attacks. And then you have some other stronger enemies, toughened enemies, and nemesis and horror level enemies. So those will be a bit more dangerous, and a lot of them have special abilities and properties. For example, maybe an enemy is a Doom Herald. So when that enemy appears, the Game Master gets an immediate point added to the Doom pool. Or maybe some enemies are dreaded and cause fear. Maybe some of them fly, maybe some of them are incorporeal. And you have a really nice gallery of enemies. So you have bandits, berserkers, bodyguards, cultists, cult leaders, degenerate minions, all sorts of cannibal tribes. Maybe there are also knights that serve as enemies, pirates, all sorts of mercenaries, sorcerers, thugs. You also have wild beasts. Some of them are quite normal, to put it in a way. That is, you have some pretty nasty crocodiles and bears and even camels. If you want to recreate the Schwarzenegger camel punch scene, you could do that. But there are also some other nasty things like giant snakes and giant spiders that appear in many of Conan's stories. You also have tigers, wolves, all sorts of vermin. You also have monstrous foes like the Child of Set. Some of them cause horror, that is, they perform mental attacks. Maybe there are forest dragons. Maybe there are dwellers of the deep ones. Maybe there are ghosts. Maybe there are frost giants, like in the Frost Giants story. And then you have ghouls. Maybe you have mummified sorcerers or malign plants. You also have some enemies like werewolves and the winged ape, and I really love and hate this enemy. I hate it because the winged ape killed one of my favorite Conan characters. That's a really emotional moment. A lot of you already know who I'm talking about. But the winged apes also represent an idea that Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft shared. They believed in the evolving, of going backwards in evolution. When you stopped progressing, that is, when you stopped being improving your intelligence and evolving as a human being, and you started acting like a caveman, you start turning into like this sort of ape creature. So the winged ones are a thing of mystery. They were once a very advanced civilization, and because they are winged, it kind of makes you think that maybe they almost seem like angelic beings. But because they degenerated and became less and less intelligent and became more and more primitive, they turned into these nasty winged monsters. And then you have the otherworldly horrors. This is all about the unspeakable abominations, children of the dark, creatures of the far reaches of the skies, devils of the outer dark. And Robert E. Howard, in some of his monstrous creations, he actually matched some of the cosmic horror that Lovecraft shared with us, in my opinion. And you also have some famous ones, such as the Forest Devil. The Forest Devil, that is a creature that appears in one of the stories of Robert E. Howard. And you also have the stats for many famous characters in Conan's world, and of course you have the stats for Conan the Barbarian. And I really like the special abilities that they give him. They fit into the character concept quite well. So you have things such as No Mercy, Killing Strike, Grappler, Blood and Steel, etc. You also have some other famous characters such as Amalric of Nemedia, Astraeus, the Chronicler of Nemedia. You also have Belit, Queen of the Black Coast, Valeria of the Red Brotherhood. You also have Thoth-Amon of the Ring. I really like this Conan villain. This is the arch nemesis of Conan, and this is a perfect example of how Doom works. For those of you that do not know about Thoth-Amon, he and Conan always faced off against each other in the original stories, but in an indirect way. They never saw each other face to face. They probably were not aware of each other's presence, but they were always foiling each other's plans. So this is a perfect way of the Doom mechanic. Also, so in Thoth-Amon, it could have his own Doom pool, and because of his nefarious plots and plans, he would be making Conan's life quite difficult. And these famous non-player characters could serve as allies and enemies, because Conan doesn't necessarily have to be your ally. In fact, maybe you are chasing after a treasure that Conan is also looking for. There could come a time when you have to match steel with Conan. Heaven help you if it comes to that. Conan is quite invincible. And then you have chapter 11, Vultures of Shem, and this is a complete adventure for this role-playing game, and I'm not going to spoil things because I know that some of you are players, not only game masters. So I could say that this adventure does a very good job at presenting a somewhat mundane scenario at first that takes a downward spiral approach into turning things nastier and darker and more eldritch, to express it in a way. I don't want to give too much away. In fact, I'm going to include very few illustrations, some of them quite ambiguous, but things really represent the entire scenario represents the best of the Robert E. Howard's stories, of taking a situation that seems quite normal and blowing it out of proportion in the best way possible through the use of vile sorcery and horror. So I think it's a great way to introduce players into the Conan role-playing game. This adventure not only builds upon what is presented in the R.E.H. On the background, on the world, but also gives the characters a chance to shine, or perhaps even outshine in some respects, when it comes to the weight that Conan brings forth, because it's quite difficult to create a hero that surpasses Conan in epicness, but this adventure will have those epic moments, and to feel that the world of Conan is alive and doesn't exist just because Conan is there. Chapter 12 gives you a gallery of non-player characters that serve as allies and enemies. They come from all walks of life in the R.E.H. Some of them are more suited for urban adventures. Some of them are great for tribal adventures and perhaps some situations related to sorcery and cults, and from different environments as well. Some of them could be found on the frozen wastes of the north. Some of them could be found in different jungles and deserts. So they could even serve as adventure seats or as starting points for campaigns, because they give you all of their backgrounds, and you're already going to be thinking how to use them as you read their stories and you take a look at their abilities. So let me tell you overall what I think of Conan Adventures in an Age Undreamed of. First, I'm going to get something out of the way. How does this measure with the Mutant Chronicles role-playing game? Because both games use the 2d20 system. Well, I think there are some similarities, of course. Mechanically, there are many similarities. It's the same system. However, I do see differences between the two role-playing games. For example, in the Mutant Chronicles, I think there is a bit more emphasis in the horror and investigation side of things. Especially, this becomes enhanced by all of the havoc wrecked upon the high tech of the setting, but the Conan role-playing game focuses more on the side of brutal combat. The way the sorcery and the psychological effects of cutting an enemy's head and saying your name out loud and carrying out special attacks, wielding your sword or your axe or your knives, it integrates quite well with the 2D20 system. And as I was saying, I feel there is a bit more focus, more emphasis on that side of things. The Mutant Chronicles and the Conan RPG both work similarly when exploring or navigating different hostile environments, but it is that sense that the Mutant Chronicles focuses a bit more on horror and investigation, and Conan focuses more on combat. Although there is horror, I feel like the Conan characters are a bit more equipped to face it, perhaps because they are more used to those savage times, and maybe because of the character creation process, that the steps integrate the mechanical side with thematic side so well, with the background, with the war stories and such. I think that there are significant differences, so that you don't feel that you are playing Mutant Chronicles Conan style or vice versa. I also think that this Conan role-playing game gives you enough and even more in the character creation steps, so that you do not feel like your character is just a Conan clone. And with all of the details presented in the R.E.H chapter, you will feel that your character could perhaps serve as a sort of, perhaps even a rival for Conan. Perhaps you will become a king or a queen of some other thing. Perhaps you could build your own empire, and you don't necessarily have to feel like Conan is always outdoing you and outfighting you. As I was saying, perhaps we will even fight against Conan at a certain time. So that's really awesome, and that's quite necessary in a role-playing game such as this one, where you have this titanic presence, one who is probably the most iconic sword and sorcery hero. You really need to have a character that can stand up to that hero in that level of epicness. And like I said, I like how the Doom mechanic works. It's not necessarily related to Thulsa Doom, the way that it could represent those sorcerous energies and vile plans of the villains working against you, because Conan has explored many cursed temples and vile jungles where you feel like there are spirits and curses and demons and devils everywhere trying to make you fail when you least expect it to. But at the same time, with the system of fortune points and the momentum, you also feel quite epic, quite powerful, quite glorious even. In fact, if I will have to describe what this game focuses on, it focuses on gold, glory, gods, and bloody combat. But there's still that sense of exploration. So I highly recommend that you get the Conan Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of role-playing game. In about a week, I'm going to review the first adventures that have been released for this Conan RPG. They are called Jewel Thrones of the Earth. And when you play the Conan RPG, remember what Conan said once: if life is illusion, then I am no less an illusion. And being thus, the illusion is real to me. I live, I burn with life, I love, I slay, and I'm content. So definitely get Conan Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of. I consider it the best Conan role-playing game, and that's even considering all of the Conan RPG clones out there, because there are many good barbarian role-playing games out there that try to emulate this sword and sorcery style of adventures, and even though they are great, I think that the 2D20 system captures the essence of Robert E. Howard's original stories, maybe because the people involved in the project are quite, what would you say, they love the source material, and they did a great job. So definitely get this one. Thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.